Life is complex, so is our mental health. It cannot be understood by diagnosis alone. Our philosophy is treat the person, not the mental illness. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Humanizing Mental Health. I'm Trent Nickers.
And I'm Jeremy Alcorn.
Yeah. Well, Jer, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so again, today we are joined by our last guest. And I'm going to get your last name wrong. Dang it, I should have said that before. Szola.
Yeah,
right, like
perfect.
Lola. Why did I forget that already?
Yeah, sorry.
Szola.
Yeah.
So Dakota Szola, which
Yeah.
there's a nice rhyme to that too.
Mm-hmm.
And last time, of course, we did a bit of an introduction, and this time we wanted to really get into one aspect of the treatment that you've been involved with, and I'm already actually chomping on the bit to dig into this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Take
it's
me in
funny
there.
chomping on the bit.
Yeah.
There's something that's going to come with that. Funny.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. We've got
so-
a bit of an oral fixation, ladies and gentlemen.
So this episode, of course, being called "Our Relationship with Our Feelings, Our Relationship with Our Food."
Now it's making me think about the oatmeal that I had for breakfast this morning and how I was eating.
Yeah, oatmeal should be thick enough to stop a bullet.
All right. Thank you, Shrek.
So with that note, kind of opening up that conversation, I think the title is very purposeful in telling us where we're going, and what does that even mean? Our relationship, with our feelings, our relationship with our food.
Right. Well, I think that can mean a lot of different things, but I think those two things can be linked. Of course, our feelings and how we eat and how we feel about food can definitely play off of each other.
I'm curious, like, as you bring that up, like, what about food, like, beyond, like, the importance for maybe with your clients, but how is that important for you as a practitioner? Why is this important for you as an individual that brought you into that?
Yeah, so I'll give a little bit of a background story. When I first got a job, probably in high school and then into college, I worked in the bodybuilding industry. And so that was a very interesting industry to work in, starting to figure out what my relationship was with food was, and as well as watching other people in the industry struggle with their relationship with food. That was probably the first realization for myself that, what we do have a relationship with food, and why does everybody struggle with that relationship? And so that was probably the first encounter with this topic that really set off a passionate goal of mine in the counseling that I do.
Interesting, because as you bring that up, like I work out quite frequently, and I'm around a lot of bodybuilders, and they have, I don't know, like they look at food as fuel, but then they need food, but then at the same time too, there's that level of restriction there, that on one level, we would look at that type of relationship outside of the bodybuilding industry as almost something unhealthy, but because it's so vital that's almost encouraged. Am I wrong?
Yeah, like I would say in the bodybuilding industry and outside, that restriction of food is definitely glorified. It's a good thing. But really, when we look at our emotions and our body process, it's not always the healthiest route for things.
Sure. And that other portion of layer that comes on this, which is about our relationship with our body, our relationship with our feelings, our relationship with our food, is at the center, our relationship with our body, and how we then value ourselves. Sure. So I think one of the key parts of the work that you do now then is within the realm of eating disorders.
Yeah, I work a lot around eating disorders and disordered eating, as well as like body image, self-esteem, over-exercising. They all kind of go hand in hand in some aspects.
Or they overlap.
Yeah, they fit well together.
like a chain that isn't always linear, but some links actually hook to other links.
Exactly.
Yeah, and like maybe I'm jumping the gun, Dakota, so please stop me. But I'm almost wondering too how that links in with gender identity too, with different types of issues that you deal with. Because, like, whether you identify as male or female.
Yeah, there's definitely a link there. And in the eating disorder or disordered eating industry, the research is very much lacking. There's not a lot of research around eating disorders, specifically around different populations. But what I'm noticing now is there is this spike of research around gender and eating disorders. And so that's really interesting. And it's kind of showing that there is a greater link to eating disorders or disordered eating when there's like if somebody's gender questioning or if, yeah, they're just wondering about that kind of thing.
Interesting. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah. So essentially what is kind of coming out is that people who are identify as like a different gender than what they're perceived to be, there is a higher rate of eating disorders or disordered eating.
Sure.
So oftentimes the relationship that they have with themselves and their body and their how they identify can really impact their relationship with food.
Sure. Now, there's some common links that are kind of across everyone. That is to say, everyone in terms of how they perceive themselves is at the core of a disordered eating. That is, I mean, in the DSM itself, it's like there was a youth that had seen me. And the mom was like, I'm really concerned about an eating disorder like anorexia, and went through the process. Actually, this person does not fear fatness. And they don't have, when they look in the mirror and they see their ribs poking out, they actually are not okay with the way that they are. They don't want to be this skinny. This is not anorexia. And so, but that position around perceived process and how I perceive myself. And I guess your point there is an individual that is their biological sex is identified as male, but they don't line up with that. Their own internal process, they identify or feel that they're female, is actually even more likely to struggle with their relationship with as an eating disorder, or the other way around, where their perceived position of gender doesn't match up with that biology.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe this is pivoting the conversation a bit slightly, but like as I hear that, because anorexia and bulimia are in the media, and I think sometimes that because there's an awareness of that, I think maybe an understanding of what that really looks like. In terms of like a real clinical sense, maybe the average or the standard viewer may not have a full understanding, full grasp of that. Can you speak to a little bit more about like what that would look like?
Yeah, like what anorexia is, what bulimia is, what the different eating disorders are.
Yeah. So there are a few different eating disorders. I'll cover definitely anorexia and bulimia. So anorexia is essentially somebody restricting food, and that is their goal. Sometimes there is some over-exercising happening, but not always. So essentially, they view themselves as larger than what they are.
In fact, if it's okay, before you jump into bulimia, there's something that I find very fascinating about this, because that, as you say, perceive different what they are. And we'll probably, I imagine, move back into this more in as we talk about it further, but that starvation brain, that the person is looking in the mirror, and while they're very thin, their muscle mass is so deteriorated because their body's been pulling that their need for calories from their proteins inside their body. And so then their movements, their body still gives like a jiggle. It's not firm. And they still perceive this sense of fatness, and it's not there. They're not fat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's about how they're equating that, and it's almost like that perception bias of that's not fat, that's just loose skin,
Yeah.
basically.
It's like a lack of cognitive understanding that they're not wrong. That when they move, they do jiggle, but they're not fat. That's actually atrophy of muscle. Yeah.
Yeah, and I almost wonder what it's like for clients, like when they make that different connection, and how that
Sure.
how that then shifts
Yeah.
their perspective, like
Yeah.
literally when they look in the mirror, like kind of like coming to see, going from one picture to another.
Yeah. In fact, I wish it was that easy, that me saying to them, actually, you've lost all your muscle, and it would be enough for them to let go. I wish that was true.
Yeah.
It's just, so then I interrupted you. So
okay.
we talk about anorexia, and then you were kind of comparing with what the general structure is in bulimia.
Yeah, so bulimia encompasses somebody with a binging and purge cycle. So oftentimes they will binge, so they'll intake a lot of food, and then they'll purge. So they'll get rid of it by inducing vomiting. Sometimes it's laxatives. And so it's just kind of this cycle. Sometimes there is restriction in that as well. And oftentimes there is some kind of restriction. I can find some kind. But it's usually that binging and purging that we see.
Sure. Yeah. This is like the foundational position around
Right.
what bulimia is. Yeah. And then, of course, then we come back, as I said, to that starvation brain. The person that has anorexia, at some point in time, their body will force them to eat. And often then it looks like a binge.
Right. Yeah. Whenever there is some sort of restriction, there's usually always some kind of binge or higher intake of food.
I'm interested because you work a lot with kids. Like, how does eating disorders play in with stuff within the family system too?
So eating disorders is a big thing within family systems. And oftentimes when I work with clients, especially younger people or children, their family has to be involved in some way. Because it's so connected to the family and how this family operates. Yeah, there's lots of different connections I can make.
Isn't this fascinating?
Yeah.
Because one thing I see, you almost hesitate because while there are truths that are important, it's actually hard sometimes to negotiate this minefield where we don't feel like, or we don't express something that is like parent blaming, because we certainly we don't see eating disorders as parents' fault.
No, not
and
at all.
yet the stomach and the guts, of course, the majority of your serotonin coming from that area, and this is, of course, one of the big reasons why we wanted to use the title we did, and that is because as your guts are this emotion center, and then we're changing our relationship with our food, we're actually changing our relationship with our guts and with those emotions. Often then saying, I'm going to suppress these emotions by not feeding them, like literally not feeding them with food. I'm going to suppress these emotions, or I'm going to reject them. I'm going to reject them by vomiting. I'm going to push these feelings out by vomiting.
Yeah. Like,
And a lot of times people are not like understanding or seeing that related. They're only seeing this as a biological diagnosed condition.
yeah. I'm like, as you say, like, I'm going to vomit. It's like I'm literally rejecting that exile part of myself out of there. But then that would almost I'm almost imagining, like, the more that you push it away, the stronger that would then become. Am I wrong?
Totally. There's also this idea of what I call the loony effect. And so it's something that sometimes somebody will, I guess, have anorexia, say, and they'll kind of flip-flop between different eating disorders. So they'll flip between, say they're anorexic, and then they go to bulimia, so they start purging, and then they might just have a poor relationship with food, but they might go back to anorexia. So
Sure.
they
so
can
they might
definitely
move to like a
move.
binge eating disorder without
Totally.
purging.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there's two other kind of eating disorders that I kind of wanted to mention, I guess, today.
Sure.
Yeah.
And one is that binge eating disorder, and I wanted to mention that because I'm seeing a lot more people come in for assistance with that. And then it's not technically in the DSM, but that orthorexia piece, like the almost idea of wanting to be healthy and how that starts an obsession with food.
Oh, no, this is fascinating.
Yeah.
Because I've never actually heard that word.
Yeah.
Do explain.
Yeah. And so most of the time, like, of course, it's not in the DSM. I know a lot of professionals are pushing it to be added to the DSM.
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. For those that don't know that.
Yeah, I definitely honor that term. It's something that I resonate with, just with my background in the bodybuilding industry. But it's almost like this obsession with health. And sometimes, of course, when we have an obsession with health, we have an obsession with what we eat, how we exercise, and that can really impact somebody's life negatively.
Yeah. And as you talk about that, it really brings up something for me that I say to a lot of my clients, where is a part of ourselves or an activity going from helpful to harmful?
Yeah. So, and eating disorders are tricky because we need to eat to survive and to be healthy. Oftentimes we do need to move our bodies and we do need to eat. And so what does that look like when we can't just completely get rid of those things?
Absolutely. It's not like something like, let's say, alcohol, cigarettes, or something else where you can eliminate that. So I'm like, maybe this is a good question, is that how do you then go back through and start to work with people with their relationship with food?
I think that really goes back actually to the title is that feelings and the emotional piece to that. Oftentimes when I work with people with eating disorders, they have high anxiety or they want to control what they eat or how they can, I guess, exercise to control what they look like. In order to soothe their emotions or soothe their anxiety. And so when I start working with somebody, we do explore a lot of emotions and kind of what they're expressing and what's difficult for them to express.
Yeah. In fact, if it's okay, I want to tie in something, and I can see that it's not a perfect fit. And there's actually different ideas in the mental health field about this. It's just something, as you're talking about that, really resonated with me, that is from Gabor Mate. Surprise. But in which he says that an addiction is not the problem, it's the solution. And so this individual who doesn't know how to be able to, a way to healthily negotiate things in their life that are out of control. And the solution becomes the eating disorder. Now, there's people out there that kind of lump eating disorders in as an addiction. And there's others that reject that idea. That overlap spot I really do see as just that position, that it's like, this is their solution. You can't take away their solution without giving them another solution.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, because with that, how do you I love what you said there, Jeremy, but I'm curious about how you introduce that idea to families and parents.
And so sometimes when people start looking for help or coming to me, they know that something is wrong or that something needs to change. And so it is a pretty easy introduction for me to say, hey, have you looked at it this way? And what do you feel about that? What does that feel for you when I talk about it in that way? And so oftentimes, like the first sessions I do with a client, we often do explore different kinds of topics, and one of them being emotions. And we're all human, so we all have emotions and we all have our coping strategies, some healthier than others. So it is a pretty natural way to introduce emotions and the idea of control and anxiety with eating disorders.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. And then really, what I'm wondering is, as Trent and I kind of have used curiosity to explore this with you, something tells me that in preparing for this podcast and thinking about it, there's some particular things that had come to your mind that we haven't necessarily touched on. And I'm interested in what some of those things might be, some things that you would want to share with the listener that would help them better understand this and maybe move them forward, either for a loved one or for themselves.
Well, I think one thing is that lots of times we don't see eating disorders. So when we look in the media to what an idea of what eating disorders look like, we usually see somebody who's very sick, usually very underweight. Anorexic is kind of the one that we see the most, I find. But eating disorders can come in people with any shape, size, weight. And so sometimes we always go to that image in our mind about the skinny person or the person that's underweight, but oftentimes there are people that don't look underweight that struggle with eating disorders. And we find that maybe they're rare because we don't see them, but they're all around us. It's very common. We just don't identify it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up because I know an individual in the community that struggled with bulimia, and she is actually a larger person, and most people actually wouldn't think of her as bulimic because she is a larger person.
Yeah, and I think media does have kind of a big role in what our brain automatically thinks of when we think of those terms or eating disorders. And maybe the lack of education in like general society or general population. We don't really know what those are or what they look like or what the risk factors are. Or
Sure. Yeah, I really do like that. Because even as I look back at my own relationship to food, even into my youth, and I know I'm crossing into another position because there's, interrelated things. It's just not knowing that that I was experiencing attention deficit disorder, and there's massive overlaps with other things, addictions, food-related concerns, and I would eat 6 hot dogs as a snack. But I was also, of course, attention deficit disorder, hyperactive, in that I was spending hours a day playing sports, like 2-3 hours every single day. And so to look at me, you would have never thought that's somebody that has a weird relationship with food, but I soothed myself with food all the time.
Yeah. And I mean, like, as you bring that up, like, you think of like teenagers, or especially teenage boys, they're basically supposed to be like horses, like you're expected to eat more, but is that healthy or is that harmful?
Yeah. And it's not like a simple thing, right? It's like, one time I ate 16 hot dogs, not as a dare or anything. I was just hungry, but then where does that end? If it's a normal teenage thing, then why was I 30 and still polishing off an entire pizza to myself regularly?
Yeah.
I think too, that brings up the idea of eating disorders or disordered eating in people who identify as male. Because oftentimes when we think of eating disorders, we think of somebody who is female.
Sure.
And so I guess eating disorders can look very different in males, and there's becoming more research and people are talking about it more. But it's definitely a thing that is kind of on the horizon in eating disorders and becoming more popular.
And I'm not saying that we need to pathologize people. In fact, I think just the opposite. That is a normalization that our genetic foundation in the core of our genes is one in which famines happened often throughout human history, and so the idea of there being just food whenever you want it at your own convenience is not the natural way that we would have related to food. And that position in which you'd go, well, we need to eat because you never know when there's going to be a famine again. And I think you mentioned earlier, Trent, about the idea of the number of fast food establishments.
Like we were talking before this episode, like my mother grew up in the 1950s, and when she was a child there was like one restaurant and A&W, and going out to do that was a treat. And where she would come home and my grandmother would make like her own bread, her own donuts, and going to the bakery was a treat, whereas now it's like instant gratification. And I almost wonder there with epigenetics, like when you have that, you turn that on. And I mean, what was the one, like, I think about kids when they're screaming, crying, like going out in the community. It's like, okay, well, let's give them a treat. Let's take them to McDonald's.
Soothe them.
Yeah. Let's give them this food. Yeah. And then how does that high sugar, high salt food, when you give them to them when they're upset, how does that impact their relationship with food?
It definitely could impact them for sure. I think too, when we look back, we haven't used food as maybe as much of emotional support as we do now, just because the access to it is different. But we have used food to comfort, like throughout history too. And so,
like medicinally even. It's like someone's sick, homemade chicken noodle soup.
Right.
And it actually is very powerful. It's important.
Yeah.
Or what about like I think about Holocaust survivors, because I've heard of because I've listened to stories of people that have had parents as Holocaust survivors, and they will want to feed their children, and they want fat children in a way, because that would mean fat means security for them.
Or the Hawaiians.
Yes.
Who value big.
So our society and the impact that our values and cultural, I guess, ideas also play into the fact of food. And when I work with somebody regarding food, that is one session that we do, is we talk about, okay, like, how are you impacted by the media, or by what you see on TV, or by the books you read, or even just like your family and how they talked about food.
Yeah. In fact, that's really important. We've looked at both sides of the coin in this last few minutes. To say to somebody it is bad to soothe yourself with food is actually not necessarily a good message. It's like it's not necessarily bad to soothe yourself with food.
Yeah.
It's really about balance. Even in DBT, one of the strategies that they recommend is to use taste. And so they say chocolate actually is a good thing to soothe yourself with. But that is, if it's not the only skill you're soothing yourself with.
Right.
Yeah. Or mindful eating. When I do mindfulness, when I first introduce it to a lot of people within a group, we take a piece of chocolate, you put it on your mouth, and you literally go through that full 20 minutes or whatever it is to get the chocolate down to your stomach. And we're talking our way through it when we do that.
So it's more about, I guess, an intentional relating than it is to say there's one way that's right with food and one way that's wrong.
Yeah, I think everybody's values, of course, play a role in that. And if there's negative consequences, and I think that goes back to that addiction, why people will argue that it's more in the addiction realm, is like, is there negative consequences that really impact your life?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's a really interesting question to lead out to our audience, and to really ask them, how are your relationships with food, and what are the positive, and what are the relationships that maybe you need to work on?
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to speak just for 1 second, just flash in my mind, you know how that works. I'm going to speak for just 1 second to the individuals out there that are like me, whose brain wired in a way that was more of an ADD kind of wiring. And if they're receiving treatment for that, then the majority of the treatments are amphetamines. And amphetamines don't just diminish your appetite; they actually change your metabolism. And so, just a quick note to those people: you might actually want to consider then how you relate to the food that you're eating, because if you're like me and sit well within your body mass index, that doesn't actually necessarily mean that you have a healthy relationship with your feelings and food.
Absolutely.
So it's time for us then to pull things together. And Dakota, we're very grateful for you to connect today. Any final words?
Thanks for having me. I am really thrilled to share the message about this topic. It's something I'm really passionate about, and I really want to serve my community regarding this topic. So thanks for having me.
So on that note, I'm Jeremy Alcorn.
I'm Trent Akers. See you next time.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope that this message has been as meaningful to you as it has been to us. If you're looking for help, you can find us on Facebook at Humanizing Mental Health.